Hello to anyone watching this. Now that Inside Number 9 has finished its very fitting 9-series run, it can quite definitively be called one of the absolute best TV shows ever. It was consistently creative, consistently innovative with the format of television, it was consistently well cast. There's just so much to talk about, so I'd really just like to take an opportunity to do so. So today I just wanted to rank every single episode of the show, mainly based on each episode's story and twists, because I have absolutely no critique about any of the performances or sets or directing or any of that. You know, my main opinions on the show come down to how each of the episodes played out. But before I start, I do just want to state a few quite obvious things. Mainly the fact that this is all just my own takes on these episodes. Like, due to the fact that this is an anthology show, I'm naturally not going to see every story in the exact same way as anybody else. Like, even if it's about a topic that I have very little knowledge on, I do always go into an episode with the exact same expectations of quality, and I rarely find it hard to get invested in something that I had little knowledge of before. It's just, I do feel like the fact that I didn't know much about football gave me a different viewing experience of the referee's a wanker compared to somebody who does know a lot about football. But again, that's just the nature of an anthology show, and I did end up having some fun with pretty much every single episode. I do think one way that I might come across as unfair is just the way that I critique each episode's twist. Because while watching each episode, I enjoy keeping my ear to the ground and just trying to figure out where each episode is going. So when I see an episode have a certain tone or style of comedy, and then there's a twist that sort of betrays it or doesn't make sense, or just in general doesn't match where I thought the episode was trying to go, I'm gonna be a lot harsher on it compared to a more light-hearted episode or one that doesn't even have a twist. Like, I just really enjoy everything making sense, so when I don't feel that it does that, I do come away from an episode feeling more negative towards it. Like, I'm pretty much just saying all of this to cover my arse in case I come across as a hypocrite at any point for deriding an episode for one thing that I praise a different episode for. It's just, this is how I see the show, as like a masterful twist-filled romp. So when I feel that an episode doesn't really get that right, I'm not gonna feel as positive towards it. And there may or may not be a few times where I'll suggest how I would have written the episode, but please try not to take that as me saying I could have done any better than Stephen Rees at writing these. These are just like how I perceive the episode and how I would have perceived a better ending, I suppose. All of my suggestions aren't that serious, it's just sort of my view on it. And speaking of the boys, I would just like to put a quick personal message here to Reece Shearsmith in the very slim chance you are watching this. First of all, you looked extremely hot in the nude day scene in the League of Gentlemen, and you deserve way more praise for that. But more importantly, I know that you absolutely detest rankings of all of these episodes, but I just really enjoy ranking pretty much any set of things, so I'm gonna get a lot of joy out of doing this, so I hope that that makes up for if you completely hate this. Love you. And one more general thing before I start. I'm going to be talking about all of these episodes under the assumption that you've watched them as well. Like, I'm not going to be giving out plot summaries or talking about the twist in any detail. I'm just going to be talking as if, we both just sat next to each other and we've just watched the episode. I'm turning to you and I'm just going to bitch about everything I thought about it. This is really not the video to get you hooked on Inside Number 9. Just, if you want to go watch it now and come back to this later, and hopefully you'll remember sardines enough when I start talking about it later on. But anyway, let's finally get on with it. We've got 55 of these buggers to get through, so hold on tight. This may take a while.
Where is she? Up to mischief, I bet.
Kidnap's biggest crime is just not feeling like an Inside Number 9 episode. This just felt like a completely generic police procedural with a twist that's not only barely a twist, but doesn't even make sense in the context of the episode. Like, Shane was microseconds away from cutting off Lara's ear, completely committed to the original plan, and we're supposed to believe that there is anything that Lara could have said that would have convinced him to get on her page and formulate another plan to get away with the money. It just didn't add up to me, even when I was first watching it. And I think my main problem with how it's all presented does sadly relate to the gimmick of this episode. Like, I do really love the split screen elements, seeing what everybody is doing, but I think that in the end just became a detriment, because when we see exactly what everybody is doing at any given moment, the fact that the causation of the twist happens completely off screen sadly feels like a plot convenience. Like, that's the only way I can describe it all. Like, obviously there are plenty of scenarios in every single type of story where things can be left up to the imagination and it can all work out, but again, that just doesn't really make sense as something that can happen here. Like, we are shown how close Lara is to losing her ear, so yeah, this episode just didn't really add up to me. Especially with how generic the kidnappee is actually working with the kidnapper twist is. And they basically pulled it twice with the same amount of gravitas. Like, I genuinely think the story would have worked better if we fully saw how Lara convinced Shane, while seeing the severed ear being walked into the office, and having the split screen between Lara convincing Shane to put all of his faith into her while seeing Dominic have all of his faith in Lara. It just would have been an even better showcase of how scummy pretty much all of these characters are in a really fun way. So yeah, I'd just like to once again state how much I enjoyed all of the performances and directing in all of these episodes. It's just, for me, the story did not come together here, so it unfortunately propels itself to the bottom slot for me.
That's me shocked.
I swear I enjoy a lot about Series 7. It's just these two middle episodes completely fell flat for me personally. I just really didn't like how they basically played the same twist twice in the exact same way. Like, when it was revealed that Kat was just completely fictional and that Ezra was the author, I was stunned. Like, I did not see that coming, and I was getting really invested in the episode. And then all of the intrigue and suspense in Ezra's reality was just as compelling, but then Matilda shows up, reveals she's the author, and that's it. It just feels like one of those very rare instances where they were rushed for time and just had to quickly put together an ending, because it just felt like there was a lot of heart being put into the explanation of the writing process and how a writer perceives their own character that was just completely thrown away when Matilda just so cold-heartedly told Ezra that he was fictional. Like, I really think a change as small as Matilda being the wife of Ezra's actual author would improve the episode so much, because then the angle could be the author's died and Matilda's going through his old work and is possibly getting out some of her resentment towards him on Ezra. Or maybe the author's so consumed right now by Ezra that she's not got any time with him and she's bitter about that. It just feels like Matilda could have been so much more important and she simply wasn't. And because of that, I can't help but just see the episode as wasted potential and only really worth watching the first half of to get all the enjoyment you can out of it.
Hurry up and wait.
Hurry Up and Wait is another one that I feel was let down by the twist, but you know, at least this one only happened once rather than twice in the episode. I'm not here to have a go at the quality of the skeleton prop or anything like that. I just find that the end twist made the whole episode just kind of feel a bit aimless and needlessly mean-spirited. Like, I get that the whole show is quite mean-spirited and that the bad guys often win and that justice rarely prevails, but I was really sympathising with James. Like, I definitely didn't think that he was right that the family were the ones who committed the murder, but I was still willing to keep up with him, and to find out that not only was his main theory wrong, but that he got so harshly punished for it, I don't know, just something about it felt off. I think that despite how this obviously isn't the real world, the fact that Adrian Dunbar plays himself just sort of makes me want this episode to feel quite grounded, and so for everyone to act kind of cartoonishly, it just sort of gave the episode quite a sour taste to me. Like, I can definitely appreciate how aspects of this story came from Stephen Reese's experiences in green rooms. It's just something about all of the components to this just don't come together for me in a way that it probably does for other people who are fans of maybe true crime or something like that. I just wish that there was a more cohesive end to it all, rather than just, oh, she did kill the baby. The Bones of St. Nicholas definitely has the biggest disparity in quality for me between the main part of the episode and the twist ending. Like, I was just so invested in everything that was going on, only to be smacked in the face by the biggest plot contrivance that this show has ever had, in my opinion. All the mystery and premonitions really pulled me in, like, I felt I was champing along with them. It's just the fact that Posey has the conversation explaining all the premonitions she saw before her daughter's death with Pierce several years after it happened, only for all the premonition stuff to happen to Jasper. It just sort of felt like it fell into almost bad writing tropes. Like, there's really no other way I can describe it. It just felt like she was expositioning what was about to happen so we know what was about to happen. Like, there was no other reason for her to have that conversation, and the fact that they were immediately scared out of the church after, it just made them feel like they were just there for the exposition in the end, which is a real shame because they were compelling characters to me. Like, I did enjoy seeing all of the premonition stuff actually happen to Jasper. It's just, I really can't get over how it's just expositioned for the sake of expositioning, you know? And it's a shame that it's my only real problem with the episode. Like I said, I found the rest of it so compelling. It's just the fact that the ending was so contrivedly set up, it just really didn't hit right for me. So sadly, this episode has to end up this low.
Can you please keep it down? We're trying to think.
Don't worry, trying anything for the first time is hard.
People generally find a lot of reasons to see thinking out loud as quite offensive, but for me, I tend to think that the most offensive thing about it is just how much it wastes its premise. Like, all of the different characters are all so compelling in their own different ways, and I was genuinely excited to see how they all came together. Like, are they linked by tragedy, by happiness, by literally anything? Like, the fact that it all contrasted so much just made it more interesting to see where they were possibly going with it. Like, how would they end up interacting? So for it to just turn out that they're all just a split personality of the same woman, it was really disappointing, because it means that you don't get the proper interactions that you were expecting. You don't get to see how these characters actually bounce off of each other, apart from one scene where they all just stare at her father's corpse. And it just inherently makes watching the episode again a complete waste of time, because the vlogging means nothing, the recording a video for your child before you die means nothing, the being taped in prison means absolutely nothing. Like, all of these threads feel completely wasted at the end of the day, because they don't feel like they actually say anything about the main character. Like, yeah, finding out that all the different names are anagrams is cool, and the actual twist that she does go ahead and kill her father is a shock. It's just, again, it doesn't come together in a way that feels satisfying. It just feels like a waste of a premise and a waste of a load of compelling characters, which is a shame, but, you know, at least I'm not going to get in trouble for saying that I dislike this episode.
I didn't ask you anything about Frank Carson's dressing room.
Ask about Frank Carson's dressing room.
You tell me about Frank Carson's dressing room.
It's time for my first big hot take. I absolutely do not care for Bernie Clifton's dressing room. It's one of the most cliche episodes in the entire series for me. And I do feel like I have some entitlement to say that after they reference the cliche of a character being dead and plodding on, right? It just felt like it was a cop-out ending almost for me. Like, the characters were compelling enough, it's just to find out that one of them was dead makes everything that happened before come off a lot worse to me than they were probably intending to. It's mainly just the racism stuff that kind of falls out of place when I really thought about it, because fair enough, you want to call out your old routines as not working in the modern day, but Tommy, you're reminiscing about your best friend at his funeral. Like, is the racism of your 80s shows really the most relevant thing to think about when you're just mourning the loss of someone? I get that it's probably just another facet of his resentment towards Len, but I don't know, it just sort of made the whole ending feel a lot more bitter than it was probably intended to be. Like, it's totally just based on my view of the episode, but I just have this sort of view of previous comedy that it's harmless. Like, you can still laugh at it rather than with it a lot of the time, and for it to just be called out this much, it just felt so needless, and throw on top a very hackney and purposefully sad ending. I don't know, it just felt like this episode was almost manipulatively emotional to me, and I just don't appreciate it for that. Like, I can appreciate how this could be someone's favourite, like how this could be an emotional powerhouse, but it just didn't come together in that way for me, unfortunately.
I'm so cold!
Now it's time to get on to a bit of a streak of the horror finales to some of the series, and I think that this is the best time to say that horror doesn't work the best for me sometimes. Like, I find the whole notion of tension to just sort of not work with me. Like, I just want to get on with it. Like, if you're gonna scare me, scare me. So I'm probably not the most qualified to talk about any of these episodes, but you know, I haven't put the harrowing dead last, so I can at least appreciate it away from those elements. What I like the most about this one is just how open-ended it is. Like, it does so much to build up the world that it's in, and just how much potential danger there could be if the spirit is not transferred into Katie, that, I don't know, it just makes me really wonder what could have happened next. And I really like when an episode can do that in a efficient and actually compelling way. And I do think that the house is absolutely gorgeous, and the constant misdirection and use of props to just insert some terrifying images about what could potentially be happening in the house is all really good. It's just, again, the actual horror, scary bits just don't really add up for me, and the overall sense of tension makes it kind of slow down for me, which is unfortunate. But again, the bits that work and that they actually took a long time to think through clearly really come together for me. I think Seance Time is just a good notch above, mainly due to its use of humour. Like, this is a much funnier episode than The Harrowing, and that does a lot for me. Plus, the horror elements are a lot more subdued / in your face, which is probably contradictory, but it's not to me. I just think the prank show premise is a lot more compelling than the straight up gothic lingering horror. And the way that they play it so serious for the first quarter is really entertaining, especially when the rug gets pulled, and then seeing all the backstage drama with all the actors and actresses and general workers, I just find it really entertaining. And the pure terror of the ending is really well built up and executed. It's just, again, I don't have a real taste for horror, so I just don't think I can appreciate it as much as others. Like, I do think this is a really well done episode, and it really doesn't deserve to get dragged as much as it does by some others. It just doesn't perfectly fit my tastes, unfortunately.
And you can put your nose over there.
While I don't think The Stakeout has as good of a sense of humour as Seance Time, I do feel a lot more compelled by the interpersonal drama with the two main characters here. Like, it's all so compelling to watch, especially in one of the tightest settings for a number 9 ever. Like, just watching their backstories unravel night to night is so interesting to watch, and obviously it all comes to a head with that big chase scene that's really intense in the best way possible. I just don't really like the ending, and that's definitely a me issue because I know nothing about vampire lore. Like, none of the references to being invited in or going over a body of water clicked with me. Even on a rewatch, I had no idea what any of it meant, and the only way that I know now is because I've watched other people dissect all these references. So it's very much just because I don't know anything about vampires, but on a rewatch, this episode just does nothing for me, because I'm just like, oh yeah, that's that thing that I've been explained, and that's that thing that I've been explained. It's like, it doesn't feel that there's any sort of natural cause and effect in my head, so I just inherently can't enjoy it as much when I don't truly know what's happening. But like I said, I appreciate everything else about the episode, and I like that they went for something this specific, but not in an obvious way. Like, obviously Twilight was a decade ago, even at the time of this episode, but still, the fact they did vampires so respectfully and didn't feel like it was taking the piss is extremely commendable.
Horrible histories
Like, if you're gonna put Jim Horlick in a Stuart peasant outfit, I'm only ever gonna call this the Horrible Histories episode, and that's not even to this episode's detriment. I just find it's like a really funny coincidence that this was the episode they decided to put one of the most prominent Horrible Histories people in. Like, this is a really fun episode, obviously having one of the most unique settings out of any in the show. It has one of the biggest casts, which is incredibly well utilised. All of the interrogation scenes are incredibly engaging and incredibly farcical in the best way possible. Everything about this episode I do find comes together extremely well. It just doesn't have an extra thing that pushes it up the ranks towards my favourites, but you know, not every episode needs something like that. But I would say if I did have a more concrete petty issue with the episode, I do find the twist to be a touch predictable. Like, oh, she was a witch the whole time. Like, that's not an inherently bad twist, it just doesn't feel like they do as much as they could with it. Like, oh, she has enough strength to knock out a human being and tie them up and set them on fire. That's very magical. Like, they probably weren't going for that with the twist, but I don't know, I just think if they revealed it a bit earlier and did a bit more with it, then this might have been a lot higher for me.
This is acting.
And the winner is often maligned as one of the worst episodes ever, and while I don't think it has the tightest script or funniest lines or most compelling character or best executed twist, it doesn't have the worst of any of those things either. This is definitely another one that you can tell is important to Stephen Rees as it deals with the world of television that they've been a part of for decades at this point, and that really comes through with the plots. Like, pretty much every single character you can imagine as a representation of a different aspect of their opinions on award shows for television in general. And I do find the way that each of the characters interact with each other is fun. Like, they have a different sense of connection to each different person in the room, and despite the fact this is only a 30-minute episode with about 8 different characters, the fact that they can fit in that many obvious connections is really impressive. And in terms of the twist, I mean, I didn't see it coming. Like, if you change literally anything about someone's face, I won't recognise them anymore, so naturally I didn't pick up that the ordinary girl was actually one of the nominated actresses, and the way that she had everybody wrapped around her finger to get them to pick her in the end, it was brilliant. And the line at the end that she's the best actress just hit so hard for me. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, I just think that this is an episode that comes together really well, you know? It doesn't have any shocking deaths or anything like that a lot of other number 9s used to great effect, but this one obviously just didn't need that. Like, if there was a death in this episode, it would just have to be something completely different. So for what this wanted to be, I think it was very well executed.
Are you saying boo or boo-earns?
I think I'd built up a lot of expectations for Boo to a Goose before watching it, mainly because it was the first episode of the final series, you know, you gotta start going out with a bang or something like that, and the premise and the cast all seemed really exciting, and for the first 25 minutes I was extremely engaged with it, but then the ending hit and all momentum it had gained had just completely gone for me. Like, I'm all for a good dystopia, but this one just doesn't make sense. Like, even on the basis of being commentary of the current state of the government, like, we've literally just had weeks of unrest based upon the unwillingness to act upon crime, or at least the perceived unwillingness to act upon crime. So for the people who don't want to stop this crime being the ones that get killed off, I don't know, it just sort of seems out of touch with the pulse of the country, even if the pulse of the country's extremely wrong. It just doesn't seem like what a dystopian government of Britain right now would be going after. But even with the dystopia that we're given, it just feels like there's a lot of different ways that the replacement service would completely fail and get exposed extremely easily that obviously they didn't have time to address since it was only introduced in the last 5 minutes, but still, it's just the fact that I can think through a list of things that don't make much sense so easily. That's just the sort of thing that bugs me. So, to just quickly go through them, and do correct me if any of these were explained, but why weren't there other people on other carriages? What if parts of this group did get on those other carriages? What if Ray got into Finn's bag earlier using force? Like, they'd obviously give up on the replacement service at that point, but how would he explain all of the gas masks? You know, what if one of the people marked for death grabbed Finn and got their own mask in time, you know, assuming that he packed enough for the exact amount of people that they guessed would be on this train? And what if anyone stayed completely neutral, like just trying to leave the carriage and go somewhere else and being like, just put my vote with the majority? You know, what would they be classed as if the majority was going to be killed off? And what if someone, after signing the waiver, was like a multi-million follower influencer and just spoke out really loud and fast about what's happening? Like, that's obviously a common thing that could happen in a dystopia, you know, a big voice calling it out. Like, that's a really almost cliche way that these sorts of things fall apart, but it's just one that still pops in my head anyway. And there were plenty of other questions that I did feel like could be filled in using this plot. It's just all of those ones really nag on me, and it just sort of brings down the logic of this episode in my opinion. And it's especially a shame when so many of these stories were really compelling, like the old married couple where the wife finds that her husband is totally losing his revolutionary spark. Like, that's a really interesting story that's just instantly dropped because he's already been replaced. Like, oh, the end, don't need to care about them, never mind. But if there is just one top mark I can give this episode, Wilma is my absolute favourite Steve performance in the entire show. She just feels like a little bit of me. I'm not really into drag, I don't like the feeling of anything on my face, but just the way he called out Cleo was utterly incredible, and I can only hope to bring that much energy to someone like that one day. So yeah, this episode was a bit of a bumpy ride, if you will, but I do still love it for all of the characters and conflict that it introduced before the big twist, at least. And to be fair, I don't think I could think of much better of an ending. Like, while I was watching it, I thought it would turn into something like The Bill, where a certain group of characters are conspiring together to dupe everyone else out of sympathy money for the nurse, which could have led to its own political commentary about nurses being underpaid or something whimsical like that. But obviously, since it's a direct copy of another episode, that probably wouldn't have happened anyway. So for what we got, it does work, just probably needed a bit of tweaking that they definitely wouldn't have gotten away with if they took anything from the actual state of the country right now.
What are you mourning for? It's a joke!
I simply don't think Nana's Party is that bad. Like, it has a beautifully cynical, farcical sheen to it that I really appreciate. You know, keeping up with who's in the cake, just how much alcohol has been consumed, seeing every single character's lives just sort of fall apart in the space of an afternoon. I just find this sort of episode premise to be impossible to badly execute, and this is just a perfect example of it. Like, yes, it slightly falls into being a bit more of a sitcom-y episode, but again, they just always come out really well, I find. And the ending where the wife and the kid walk out was just so bitter in the best way possible. Like, Inside Number 9 is billed as a dark comedy, and what's darker than a family affair coming out at a grandmother's birthday party? You know, apart from all the gruesome deaths and stuff, but in terms of like a sitcom plot, what's darker than that? You know, I just can't find much to critique about this episode, apart from the lack of stakes at the end because nobody really gets harmed, but the build up to the joke with the stripper paramedic is so worth it, and obviously a bit of male nudity is always appreciated with me, so it gets bonus points for that. Just nothing about this episode doesn't work for me. You know, I just think this all worked out really well. Like, I don't have much I can say about any specific parts. You know, that might be another one of its downfalls, just a slight lack of memorability with some of its gags, but still, I just thought it worked.
I still want to kill myself right now.
I do think that the trolley problem is a well executed revenge episode. You know, the character drama and overall reason for getting revenge is extremely compelling, and the twist ending where Drew sets himself on fire is an utterly brilliant use of the titular dilemma. I just can't help but think that this really shows itself to be the Series 9 revenge episode. Like, it feels like it takes a plot element from pretty much every single previous revenge story from the show, and that just sort of stuck out for me. Even during a first time watch, I was just like, oh, we're doing a poison cup of tea again. And it's just that slight perceived lack of originality that brings this episode down for me. Like, especially the fact that the main method of revenge is by kidnapping and murdering one of the victim's family members. It just felt slightly been there, done that. Plus the fact that the exposing of Blake's exploitation of his patient is done through a voice recording after several minutes of him being like, no, I didn't do anything. It just sort of lessened the impact of the reveal, because it just felt inevitable that he'd done something extremely bad, and it was just like, oh, a patient, he abused a patient. You know, obviously that's bad, but it was just like, that's it? That's what you've been building up to for several minutes? At least to me. You know, to me. Like, I don't have any experience with any different sides of this plot, but just to me, the way that it was overall executed just felt like it could have had a bit more creativity to it. Like, maybe redo the kitchen to look like the hotel room, but it's clearly just like a flashback for Blake. But I don't know if they really wanted to bill this as the only two-hander in the show, so they only did the voice recordings for the kids, but I don't know, it just felt like it could have done a lot more if we saw the other family members by using the creativity of this show to redo the house.
Mommy, mommy.
I can't be your mother.
Okay, I really hate just immediately slagging off an episode, but even like the second after I finished watching it, I felt that Mother's Ruin was just destined to be one of the forgotten episodes in the series. It just sort of gets swept away by the hands of time very quickly. Like, even by the time we got to like Love is a Stranger or 3x3, I was already struggling to recall that this episode existed. Like, I'm not trying to say it was completely forgettable. There was just something about it that just refuses to let it stick out, to me at least. Like, I can't even say that it steals much from other episodes, like returning to one of your parents' houses as a grown-up with resentment towards them. That's a bit Wise Owl, and to be fair, that was only a couple episodes after it, so maybe it was something to do with that, but just something about the overall plot just didn't stick out to me. Like, it was all very well executed, and Anita Dobson can literally just play anything and be ridiculously compelling. Like, cannot wait to see which god Mrs. Flood is in Doctor Who. It's just, I just don't know how to describe it. This episode just is not memorable in any way, shape or form, apart from the fact that it lacks memorability to me. I just really struggle to recall much about this episode unless I'm in the process of rewatching it. Like, I remember they drew like the demony circle to call back the mother's spirit. That was kind of interesting, but it was immediately cut off when Anita and Phil walk in. Like, I don't even remember their characters' names and can't even be asked to look them up again. And I remember that a foot gets cut off, and even that was just a bit like, oh, a foot's getting cut off. Ooh. You know, obviously it was gory and I don't want to lose my foot, but even that doesn't stick out much to me apart from being a really good practical effect. And the ending where the parrot flies in and might have the mother's spirit in it was quite entertaining, and Phil getting killed off in the way he did was absolutely brutal, and I really loved the way that Reese's character used all of his knowledge about his mother's past to get them out of that situation. I do think it showed a really sweet brotherly bond that was quite understated in the episode, but I just thought it was a really good use of previously mentioned things. So I guess there are some things I remember about the episode, but again, not trying to be too cruel to anyone, but it just doesn't stick out, sadly. Last Gasp is utterly hilarious. Like, I genuinely think this is one of the funniest episodes in the entire show. Like, once again, it's got that really cynical, farcical nature to it, which added on to the fact that pretty much everyone is an utterly horrible person in this episode. It just comes together really well for me. Like, every couple of minutes, a layer is peeled back to this story that just shows another character in an even worse light, peaking with Frankie's second death, which was totally unneeded, and they were only possibly looking at a few £1,000, but were so wrapped up in it that they just killed him off properly anyway. Like, my god, it was just all so horrible in the most perfect way, and I just utterly loved it. I do think that it's not the most compelling overall plot, there's not that much depth to it, and I didn't even really think it was a twist ending. Like, if you keep up with the girl, it's sort of inevitable that she wants to show some sort of final kindness to Frankie, but still, I just love this episode for just how constantly it could make me laugh. Like, I really don't understand why this has to be one of the all-time worst for people.
Oh my god, cheers.
What I think I enjoy most about Diddle Diddle Dumpling is just how it can keep building tension through the most weird and wonderful ways possible. Like, you start to fall under the spell of the shoe yourself. Like, you start to wonder why it could possibly be that important. And so when everything's revealed that there was a twin sibling, it's kind of devastating to just realise how poor of a mental state you have to be in to want to go this far for something this petty. And the final twist where it turns out the shoe was planted and wasn't missing the whole time was genuinely shocking. It's just, this is one of the more art house episodes, and I'm not really that good at being compelled by art housery, so the overall sense of direction and pacing didn't really click with me, but just seeing the ways that this episode went and keeping up with how much of an obsession can be made over the shoe, it was intriguing. You know, it all came together. It's just, again, not in a way that I can fully appreciate, unlike others.
They'd forgotten me. Well, of course they had, you know, that's showbiz.
The Understudy is another episode from Series 1 that I just can't bring myself to dislike. Like, I do think that the story is a bit weirdly structured. Like, I appreciate the Shakespearean homage to the act-based play, but it just didn't work for me the best. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to present it in any other way because the uniqueness does help sell the plot and the progression of time. And I do think there is plenty to defend about this episode. Like, the way that characters constantly appear and then disappear is a bit jarring, but especially with Kirsty when she comes back at the end and just very calmly explains the way that she ruined multiple people's lives practically just for fun and out of a one-sided crush, is so jarring again, but in a way that just is kind of creepy and off-putting in the most spectacular way, and I really, really love that. And also, yes, the CGI is quite naff, but it's like a vision, and visions aren't meant to be that clear or well produced, so it's like they probably didn't have a choice with the bad CGI, but I think like artistically it can be defended probably. So I just think the best way to describe this episode is a load of rogue elements that somehow stick together. You know, obviously it's not my favourite episode, even out of Series 1, but I don't know, I just have an appreciation for it, for what it tried to do, especially as a Series 1 episode that generally stuck to less bombastic versions of the plots that they were delivering, you know? I think there's a lot to appreciate about this one.
I didn't even know what day it was.
I think there's a lot to love about Love's Great Adventure, you know? It obviously has another very unique presentation style with its scenes. The characters in it are so insanely likeable. It just is a very sweet story, you know? It was perfect to set at Christmas. It just didn't exactly compel me, which is probably a bit of a harsh way to put it, and I can't really explain it, but it's just something about the presentation of so many quick scenes. I sort of lost track easily, and as soon as I started following one thread, it was suddenly forgotten about for a couple of days, and I was forced to follow another, so it sort of made my mind move about a bit too fast for its own good, just trying to appreciate every single story as it came and went. And obviously the twist with the car is very much in the background and almost is hard to even notice is the twist, but I do think it was a good one. You know, it very much symbolises the nature of this story. You know, it doesn't matter what the cost is, just protect everyone, make sure everyone's happy, and I think that's really sweet. You know, I'm probably still being too harsh about it. It's just, like I said, something about it just doesn't really click with me, which, you know, is fair enough, but I really appreciate what this one went for. I do think it stuck the landing. It's just not one I can 100% get behind in terms of how I enjoy viewing an Inside Number 9. Tom and Jerry is another one that I quite like, but again, it just doesn't perfectly click with me for quite personal reasons. This time it's due to the characters, or more specifically Mig. I just really didn't like him. Like, the way that he was so continuously manipulative in an almost cartoonish way for a reason that's not really established, and he starts to pick himself up very quickly in a way that's also not established. It just didn't make much sense to me, like, why he had to act like this. Like, if they said that he could jump up the ladder by being in Tom's apartment and finding like leaflets and stuff put through his door or something, that would make sense. Like, he could have even been the school janitor and then been promoted to English teacher to replace Tom or something like that. I think that might have worked better, but just the way they did it didn't really click with me. And Tom himself, you really just want to see get better, but it's almost like they purposefully made him anti-vagrant just at the start of the story to make him that tad bit more unlikable. So it sort of feels like at the start he deserves it, because as soon as he lets Mig in, he's practically just a pushover. Like, there was no point of him hating him before, and it's dropped afterwards. So it was almost like they wanted to balance out just how much misery he goes through, and I find that kind of unfair, and it doesn't really feel like good characterization to do it like that, personally. So there's just a couple things about this episode that don't really add up. But the twist, obviously, one of the all-time classics, nothing to critique there, absolutely perfect, and I loved the use of Jerry throughout the story, where once you watch it again, it's ridiculously obvious what's happening, but the way that she somehow feels so natural in every scene that she's in before that. Like, even when the apartment's starting to fall into squalor and she comes in so nicely and chippily, it's really amazing. Like, there's no notes on Jerry, but Tom and Meg just sort of feel off compared to what they could have been for this story, to me at least.
Previously on the bill.
The bill is another great concept, executed well, you know, still no complaints. All of the acting is really good and really interesting, and the twist is one that's quite simple and one that they were quite inevitably going to do at some point. You know, it's quite a common trope for everything that you see to be a scam, but the fact that it was in this episode was quite shocking, considering how mundane the circumstances are, just to keep ramping up and only for it to turn out that all of that ramping up was on purpose. You know, it's quite mind-bending and obviously leads to a great rewatch. It's just there is one slight plot hole that I noticed, because as someone who's had work manning a till, like, just hold the credit card machine out until someone taps on it. Like, I know that all of them are conspiring to not have a card tapped, but surely the friend that they invited could have just thrown his arm on quick enough. Like, I'm pretty sure they had contactless whenever this episode was set.
Georgia, F you well.
What do you think about Brexit?
As a political themed episode, Last Night at the Proms is inherently quite divisive, but at least through the lens that I managed to put it through, I thought it was quite a fun ride. You know, it was a good, typical farce for the show. I think what this episode did best is just taking the piss out of both sides of the Brexit debate. Like, obviously you have your nationalistic sides that are sort of happy to keep going how things are no matter what, but then you have the annoying, whingy progressives who just sort of scream and shout, don't get anything done, and just end up showing that they're every ist and ism that they try and reflect onto others. You know, at least to me, it felt quite balanced. Like, I'm not sure that was what they were going for, but it's how it came off to me, so I was happy with that. And all of the Jesus stuff is just the absolute cherry on top. Like, the fact that the big twist of this episode is that the second coming of Jesus Christ did not occur in a rural middle-class English household, that was just perfect for the tone of this episode, you know? I thought it all worked. Like, again, it wasn't the funniest episode, and there were some parts of it that didn't really click for me. Like, all of the genuine Jesus signs, similar to the vampire stuff in the stakeout, sort of went over my head until they were explained, but still, I just think this episode works for what it set out to do.
Hello? Give me my dishes.
I was so ready to just adore Mulberry Close with its unique camera style, but in the end it sort of did fall off the wagon a bit for me. Like, I did love all the different types of quirky and off-putting neighbours and how they interacted with the main couple, but after it's implied that the wife is being killed off, I sort of started to lose interest. Mainly because it was so obviously telegraphed that the husband might have killed her, that it was just so obvious that he didn't. I was just sat there going like, right, where's the rug pull? Where's the rug pull? Where is the rug pull? And then all of a sudden she was just back. And then dog's found dead, she gets killed by the neighbour, police cars turn up, and then they actually look at the Ring doorbell footage, and it's all sorted. Like, I don't want to say it's another wasted potential, especially because there's no real way I could think to change this ending, but I don't know, it just felt like they could have done a lot more with the premise still, but at the same time, considering they were limited to one camera angle, they got really creative with the sort of stuff they did. Like, the housebreaking scene was pure gold. Like, you can tell exactly where everyone is, despite the fact that you can't see most of them half the time. And the way that it all built up to the Michael Ball narrating over a Netflix documentary joke was peak number 9 comedy. It's just, again, I hate to say it, but parts of this were a bit too predictable, and that just sort of lowered my enjoyment on the first time watch, which is a shame, but you know, what can I do? I still enjoyed the episode for the most part, especially with its characterization.
You can win the bus fare home if you're lucky.
I was lucky enough to watch 3x3 on its original broadcast, so I was right there with everyone, googling if this was a real show, looking at Lee Mack's IMDb page, all of that. You know, it was really exciting to just have it on in the background while I had all these different tabs going, only to start to realise how the daughter might just be psychic, and then to have it all proven right in the final round with the big explosion at the end. It was a brilliant first watch. But looking back, it might be ever so slightly style over substance, mainly because of the format that they chose to use. Like, quiz shows are inherently unrewatchable because you know the questions the second time round unless you're watching them years apart. So I don't know, there's just nothing compelling me to go back and watch it again apart from the last 5 minutes, and that's really a shame, but that's just how this episode had to work. It had to play itself completely straight for most of its runtime, so I can't be mad at it for that. And obviously it was an utterly incredible twist, and I would have rather had this over the bus episode at the end of the day. I really enjoyed it, just it doesn't hold up compared to other episodes in terms of overall quality as an episode of television.
Do you want another one?
Sardines was a brilliant start to the show, even though it could be classed as a slightly generic episode with all of the plot, twists, characters, all of that not feeling too special. It really didn't need to be. You know, as a sort of starting ground for what to expect for a number 9, it works absolutely perfectly. The wardrobe especially provides such a perfect sense of claustrophobia, especially near the end when so many characters are inside of it, and it just makes every awkward comment hit harder when you can clearly see as many faces as possible crammed together, blankly staring back at it. I think it really adds to the awkward tension that this story is trying to build up. And the overall story I do think was compelling, like being able to go back and see all the seeds sown about all of the abuse committed by the father. It is really interesting, and I do love the ambiguity of the ending as to whether or not he actually did it, which obviously there wasn't exactly much time or reason for him to change his mind, but you know, it's still nice that it was open-ended in some way, shape or form.
I want everything to be perfect for my Dudley's special day.
I don't really have much to add to the conversation about Private View. I'm not really aware about the horror genre that it's pastiching. I can just say that all the kills are beautifully gruesome, and having a character that's a Big Brother housemate is always nice to see. And the twist at the end that the sweet dinner lady was the killer, all working for her son, it's so twisted. Like, I love the pure cynicism of this episode, that no matter what happens, no matter how you're put back together, some people can only inherently fall apart. The only real possible issue I could have with this episode is, again, just a slight lack of memorability for me. Like, it's not one of the funniest episodes, and I don't even remember the order that everyone was killed in, and that's how you know it's not a memorable murder mystery.
How dare you!
Mr. King is another episode that I really, really loved, just until the ending. Like, all of the setup with the creepy school and the creepy children and the creepy everything was so intriguing, especially the sort of up in the air mental state of the teacher. You know, all of that was really interesting to keep up with, but again, it just felt like it was thrown away for the sake of the twist at the end, which I really don't appreciate, but at the same time, if it misleads me in a good way, it can sort of make up for that. But I don't know, the fact that the creepy children turned out to be a creepy cult of children, it didn't really feel like a big shock horror twist. Like, yes, the ending song was utterly visceral in the best way possible, but I don't know, it just didn't feel like it was that big of a twist to me, at least. Like, having watched the first 20 minutes of the episode, if it was like paused and I was like asked what I thought the twist would be, I was like, oh, are the children going to be part of a cult? You know, that was just the first answer that was coming to my head. So the fact that that's actually what happened, I don't know, it's not fully this episode's fault, but I don't know, it's just the fact that I thought of it sort of brings it down slightly. But I still really enjoyed pretty much everything else about it. Like, the way that the children felt so real despite everything that was going on with them just made it feel even more creepy in a sense. And when all the investigating happens about who Mr. King actually is, and the entire thing about the made-up allegations against the teacher, it was all so fascinating to me. Like, it really could have gone in any direction. It's just like I said, I felt I could too easily predict what that direction was going to be, you know? Like, they could have done something different with it, but I couldn't think of something that would have the same impact that the ending scene did as a thing on its own, you know? As someone who prefers Inside Number 9's use of wordplay for comedy, I didn't think I'd get that much out of A Quiet Night In, so I surprised even myself when I loved it as much as I did. Like, this is peak physical humour for the show, especially with the dogs. That's like utterly brutal in the way that you'd hope for. Just everything about this episode really does work as a silent movie. And I don't think any wordplay could have made it any better, to be honest. They did absolutely everything they could with a surprisingly minimal script. And I love just how incredibly stupid pretty much every single character is portrayed here. Like, obviously you have the rich couple that don't really get up to much, don't realise what's happening, and just end up killing off each other, really. Then you have the two main thieves that just can't get anything done and end up getting caught by everyone except for the actual owners of the house. And then the other thief that comes in, tries to act smart, be more direct with it, and ends up taking the fake art anyway, you know? Everyone's a moron in this story, and combine that with the physical humour, it just completely works.
They're all lying. We all know that, you judgmental bitch!
Even though I don't think it's the best revenge story that the show's ever done, you just can't top the Riddle of the Sphinx for its stakes, its setting, its premise. All of that is so amazing. Like, especially all the cryptic crossword stuff. You can just tell how much of a massive fan Steve is of the whole thing, and just all of it comes together so brilliantly, especially why Nina wants to poison Squires. Like, that's such a good reveal, and for it to only be at the halfway point and not be the biggest reveal of the story, it's absolutely mad. And the way that the pressure keeps piling on all of these characters until two of them end up dead, just, it's so intense. You know, like I said, it's not my absolute favourite revenge story, but it still just works on every single level, and I'm always happy to go back and rewatch it, even if it's just to relearn what a cryptic crossword is, just in case I ever come into a life or death situation with one.
He can talk, he can talk, he can talk! I can sing!
It may be a bit controversial to have this as one of my preferred Series 3 episodes, but I just like the sort of almost chill out nature of the empty orchestra. Like, it's lower stakes, there's no death or destruction, it's just a workplace party, and having been to plenty of those and how they can quite quickly devolve into sitcom premises, I was totally sucked in by this episode. and it didn't disappoint. Like, the cast is one of the best out of the entire show in terms of the names they got to play these types of characters. I think that the whole drug pill roulette thing was a bit of a letdown. Like, it's one of those things that didn't even really need to be there. Like, it wasn't even a red herring, it was just pointless. But I can look past that because I just had so much fun with this episode, especially the ending where the cheater gets revealed for once and a new couple gets together. All of it is so genuinely sweet, and that's what this episode needed, and I think it pulled it off perfectly.
A broken marriage!
To Have and to Hold has the absolute best sinking feeling horror of the entire show. Like, the fact that the twist is so out of nowhere and so brutal and almost doesn't add up with what we've seen the rest of the episode just works so perfectly. Like, the contrast is absolutely the point of the episode, but it's just the way that it's executed and then almost farcically turned against Adrian in the next scene where he's supposed to go on holiday. It just works so perfectly to just make you feel utterly horrified for everyone involved, and the fact that they don't even explain why he kidnapped the woman, it just adds another layer to it. Like, everything about this episode is so horrifying in the best way possible. Like, it's obviously not the funniest, and as someone who quite hates cringiness, I can barely sit through the medical roleplay scene, but for what this episode set out to do, it executed it perfectly.
Magic! Magic, magic, magic! Magic!
Misdirection is my absolute favourite pure revenge episode in the show, especially in terms of its ending. Like, I love a good set of circumstances that's so convoluted that it needs a multi-minute flashback to explain, and this is definitely one of the most satisfying to unravel. Also, I love how they made the choice to show Wando's murder at the start of the episode. Like, all the other revenge stories just introduce everyone with a blank slate, like you don't know who's gonna turn out to be a murderer or anything, but the fact that this one starts with that, it works so much better for it. Like, I can't imagine any of the other revenge stories also working like this, but I really can't imagine this one working without knowing what happened at the start. And then the middle is just good old number 9 backwards and forwards establishing who's who and what's what, you know? Just everything about this episode works for me, and it was really interesting to get a good hard look at magic. It's just, again, it's not the funniest episode, so it inherently doesn't click with me as much as what's above it.
Vive la France!
I think La Couchette is definitely the most underrated series opener in the entire show. Like, I thought it was just a really fun ride the entire time. I thought it had great humour, I thought the story was really compelling, and even though it wasn't the most complex twist, it's like, how else would he have died if it wasn't murder? You know, why would they just kill someone off through natural causes in this show? The only thing keeping this from getting higher for me is just the fact that I can't get behind a couple of the characters. Like, especially Jorg, I found to be a bit too cartoonish, even for the story that this was going for. Like, how do you make a bed that unpleasant to be in after just a couple minutes of lying in it? Like, that's so gross, and I just don't like it, and the fact that it's in such confined space and he's that smelly, it just puts me off. And Hugo is also not the most exciting character. Like, I do enjoy the pseudo arc he goes through as a stowaway on the train, but apart from that, all the other characters are lovely, and it's nice to see how they get on in this situation. And I especially love how everyone so perfectly conveys the uncomfortableness of being unable to get to sleep due to your surroundings. Like, the first few minutes with Maxwell I found to be intensely relatable, and I know I would not be able to get to sleep easily on a bed that tight and with only one pillow. I think Tempting Fate is the most underrated series ender out of the entire show. Like, I find the premise so compelling. Like, every show on the planet needs to have a monkey's paw episode. And it helps that the characters and the setting are really unconventional, even for number 9. You know, I think it all just comes together extremely well. It's also great that the characters aren't stupid. Like, as soon as they see what happened to Frank, they try to play it as level-headedly as possible. Even though when the 90-ish thousand pounds comes into play, that starts to crumble, I still love how realistically they play it for a good while, and even when it starts to crumble, it still feels like you can easily relate to what each of them are trying to do. And the ending is brutal to a bougie extent. Like, the fact that everyone just explodes in the end is just the perfect topper to such a surprising downer of a story, you know? I think this works great as just a really compelling story where you just feel glad that you're not a part of it. Like, I would personally never want to go out and clean an old dead person's apartment for any amount of money, so good on them for being willing, but at the same time, they all got their comeuppance in the end for how greedy they were all trying to be.
Charlie says that if ever you see a box of matches lying around, tell Mummy because they can hurt you.
Wise Owl absolutely deserves all the love that it gets. Like, where so many inferior shows would just use 70s PSAs almost as just a gag, the fact that they're weaved in so perfectly in this story to almost give you the same sense of paranoia that Ronnie does in his daily life is just perfection. And the fact that it all stems from Wilf refusing to acknowledge that he didn't act in the way that the Wise Owl would is so understatedly evil. Like, this is the sort of same thing as if the Go Compare guy got insurance from somewhere else, you know? Like, obviously, the Go Compare guy wouldn't kill anyone in that process, but still, the fact that this all relates back to him playing the character of the Wise Owl is just so creepy, and especially the scenes at night when the house feels totally abandoned. It's so off-putting in the best way possible. And the ending is so satisfying, you know, again, where an inferior show would have Ronnie just kill Wilf off for the sake of shock. He just decides to walk out and face his demons, you know, that's so perfect. Like, it's almost its own extension of him believing the Wise Owl and believing in a good set of morals, you know. In the end, the Wise Owl is what also brought Wilf down in some complex way that I probably can't explain very succinctly, you know. Just everything about this episode is so perfect. Just, once again, not the funniest, so sadly not my favourite.
I'm good in a crisis. After all, I used to work the suicide hotline.
Cold Comfort is a classic for a reason. You know, once again, I don't have much to add to this conversation, but it's brilliantly presented. It's got a really beautifully twisted story with just a really messed up premise and main antagonist that you wouldn't be able to get away with in most shows, but the way that they pull it off here is so brutal. Like, you truly believe Chloe's story the first time you hear it, so for her to suddenly, even in the second call, go back on that, it just feels like a stab to the heart for everyone involved, and I really like the story for that. You truly feel chained to what is happening, and that's so helped by the static variety of cameras. You truly feel that there is no escape from the situation. You are just forced to watch it play out. No moving, no fidgeting, just observing. And I think that's why this story works so well. It was a brilliant choice for this to be a static camera episode, and for it to take place in such a relatively obscure environment that you don't often think much towards unless you need it. Just everything about this story was so perfectly crafted, you know. I have absolutely no critiques for it. And I also have to give special praise for how well this episode works on a rewatch. Like, obviously you now have all the information and you can piece it together, but knowing that this is all from George's computer's perspective adds such an extra layer to this all, especially with the first call with Chloe. It just adds an extra bit of brutality to the story that you really don't get on a first watch. So just everything about this was so well thought out. I just can't praise it enough.
I absolutely believe in bringing back the death penalty.
The solemn atmosphere and tone in How Do You Plead is absolutely unmatched, you know? Like I said, I prefer the comedy-based episodes of this show, but just the way that this is executed, you just can't take your eyes off of it. Like, it's literally just a conversation between two people, but it's just performed so incredibly that you can't help but just be infatuated with both of them. And the way that the Tangerine story started to play into everything was so perfect. Like, I didn't find the dream sequence to be as purely disturbing as some others. Like, as soon as the nurse fell asleep, I expected something to do with the Clementine story to pop up. But the way it ended up playing into the ending of the episode was so perfect. Like, finding out how the nurse was actually the bully the whole time, it was just amazing. And seeing the barrister get his comeuppance for everything was... running out of adjectives here. Just everything about this story worked so well, and I'm really glad that this was the horror episode of this series. You know, especially since it wasn't the finale, I wasn't expecting the supernatural element, so when it appeared, it was truly shocking in the best way possible. And this is just the best showcase of how well Stephen Rees knows to pick out what characters work the best in what story.
Good morning, Glenn!
Like I said at the start, I don't like football, you know, I think rugby just has way hotter men, but I still really enjoyed the referee's a wanker. I thought it was a really funny start to Series 5, you know? Like, I had no idea what any of the rules that they were talking about meant, but I was still so invested and really intrigued about who was trying to bugger everyone else over the most, you know? And it's nice, again, like the tradition is for Inside Number 9, that we take a step back and look at the more behind-the-scenes aspects of the topic of discussion. Like, the referee changing room is not what you'd expect from a football-based story in any show, but Inside Number 9 just pulls it off so effortlessly. And it helps that all the characters were brilliant in their own slightly scummy way, each having their own vested interests, no matter how important or unimportant they were to this game, you know? Again, I think I would have gotten more out of this episode if I was a football fan, but even without that, it came together perfectly. Reese's arse gets shown at one point, you know, nothing to complain about here.
Happy Christmas, you old slapper.
The Devil of Christmas just shows how much value a good, well thought out twist ending can bring to an episode. Like, I did enjoy the first, 27 minutes as its own thing, as a massive parody of 70s kitsch. Like, obviously getting in all the old equipment was perfect, but purposefully having little mistakes, I just love stuff like that. Like, you wait till my Goes Wrong show ranking. And the characters were all played so perfectly bad. You know, Rula Lenska's one of the most perfect castings out of any episode, and she doesn't get enough appreciation for that. So while I got one type of joy out of the first 20 minutes, I got a different type of, not joy, but appreciation out of the final 2 minutes when it turned out to be one big video nasty. Like, doing all the research to get in the proper equipment is one thing, but doing all the research of what was happening in the 70s film industry is another just incredible feat for this episode. Like, the way that Kathy goes from horrible acting screaming to horrible gut-wrenching screaming just adds a lot, you know. It really just shows how much terror has been added to this really otherwise mundane filming. And also, this episode deserves a lot of credit for being one of the best rewatches as well. You know, obviously you can go back and more clearly see all the mistakes when you're looking out for them, but just listening to the lines from Dennis Fulcher and realising how the context of it being all a police interview just adds another sick and twisted layer to just how chirpily he's describing everything. It's just utter perfection. While I did think that Series 9 got off to a bit of a slow start, the second half really picked up, and while Curse of the Ninth is at the bottom of the trio, I do think it has a charm all of its own. Like, the carry-on level of puns that are weaved throughout the first half of the episode are just so jarring, considering the time period that this is set in and the tone of the first scene, that I can't help but think that it works, just sort of completely throw you off what you would be expecting from this kind of almost gothic horror episode. You know, I think it works to keep you on your toes and sort of wonder what this episode is going to build up to. And while I do think that the second half ever so slightly dragged its feet in terms of where it wanted to go with the plot and what sort of tension it wanted to build, it all worked out with the ending. Like, the final walking up the stairs scene is so perfectly tense for the penultimate episode, and I like that there's still ambiguity with how it ended. You know, was she actually pushed off the stairs, or was she just dreaming and just accidentally fell of her own accord? You know, there's a lot of good mystery to this episode. I think it all came together so perfectly, and as was the theme with the second half of Series 9, to have an active reference to a 9 based thing within the episode, I think it worked so well.
If you say it loud enough, you'll always sound precocious.
Paraskevi-Decatriophobia is the quintessential farce episode of the show. I think the way that each event that happens throughout the day builds upon itself is just so comedic in a way that I can appreciate. You know, even though it's not the most realistic set of circumstances, you just sort of go with it and it's just like, yeah, that could totally happen within this poor bastard's day. So for it to all turn out that it was all planned was a good enough twist, I found. And the fact that it all got turned on its head so quickly and so thoroughly, not only with him smashing the mirror and facing up to his fear, but with Dermot O'Bloody Leary walking in to hand him a massive check, I thought that it just was its own kind of farce, but a very uplifting kind of farce. You know, I thought it all worked out really well, and I did see the ending coming where it purposefully tracked her. You know, as soon as she walked out the door and was in shot, I was like, oh, the poor bitch is about to get struck by a car. But that added to the episode as well. Like, this was a farce episode, so for the ending to be this over the top and easily read, I thought it added to it all in the end. You know, I absolutely adore this episode for that.
You think you've got problems? We've got share a bed.
So to get the big question out of the way, I did watch Psychoville after Death Be Not Proud, and even in spite of that, I absolutely loved this episode. Like, David and Maureen are such compelling characters that you don't even need their previous context to enjoy watching over their story and seeing how their lives started to fall apart. Like, despite not knowing who the main adult baby was supposed to be, I just really loved the plot of this episode. And even though the ending was quite sad, with poor old Beatty getting possessed, even though she seemed like quite a sweet woman who just wanted a stable life, and that was much more of a Psychoville type of twisted ending, especially with the weird supernatural elements, I still thought it all really worked. And having watched Psychoville and then come back to this episode, I do feel like I had a completely fresh viewing experience for it. So I can just appreciate this episode in multiple ways that some poor die-hard Stephen Reese fans probably can't even appreciate this episode in. So sorry guys.
Oh, sorry, and you are? Oh, that's right. Nobody.
Simon Says is just a generally good, don't trust anyone type of story, you know? It's got a really compelling plot. I love how it ties into the modern notions of fandom that poor old Stephen Reese were starting to have to deal with more and more series upon series. But I don't think I'd have this episode this high if I wasn't able to click the twist so satisfyingly. Like, as soon as Simon killed off Gavin by stabbing him with the trophy, I was just immediately like, oh, we got another layer here. They clearly said about bludgeoning with the trophy, and I felt so proud when Gavin just chippily walks out of the bathroom like, hiya Spencer, you alright? You know, that was such a satisfying reveal for me, and for it to end even more gruesomely than it was already going to, I just absolutely loved it. Like, I did think that Simon got the perfect amount of comeuppance for what he was doing. You know, the whole him dying bit was probably excessive, but he was really just annoying me at that point in the exact way they were probably hoping to have him be annoying. So it was almost like putting him out of his misery, like the way that he was manipulating Spencer. There was no way he was getting away with it for that much longer. So I just thought this episode worked perfectly, and being able to figure out the twist so naturally, I just really enjoyed.
I was quite frankly terrified by the deep, hideous, almost mocking laugh that I had heard. Visibly shaken, I had to leave immediately.
Despite it being this high, I do feel like I have some quite complicated feelings about Deadline, because I was first introduced to Inside Number 9 overall through the Insider Mind analysis of this episode, and I really enjoy analysing good, creepy, found footage type media, so to have it all dissected and have everything explained to me, I felt like I'd already completely understood the episode. So actually going and watching it, it felt like more of a little side treat, like it was almost the supplemental content to the analysis of itself. But that's just how I tend to interpret this sort of horror media, so I can't blame it for that, and I love it even more for that. Like, being able to have it all explained, it just feels more special in that way to me. Like, it's higher up because of it. So it is a perfect, creepy, haunted studio episode. Like, it works entirely as its own thing, but again, the supplemental media just pushes it above. Control-Alt-Escape, to me, is the most modern classic of the show. I think it's emotional in the perfect way, it really throws you off as to everyone's true intentions in the best way, and the twist at the end turns out to be one of the most uplifting in the entire show. Like, everything about the escape room itself makes me want to try one even more. It looked like a lot of fun, all the puzzles were really compelling, and I loved how you could very easily pick out who was more and less interested, but still feel just as invested in them as characters and their connection as a family. But as soon as we cut to the hospital room, I just knew this episode was special. There was really no way that I saw it coming. I really just thought this was a standard escape room, potentially with actual murders involved. So to pull it back out to not a wholesome image, but an image of hope, you know, hope that the father can get better in the end. I really love that. This is just a very sweet episode that I really hope is just going to get more and more popular as time goes on.
Do you know these gays? Do you know these gays?
What I enjoy the most about The Last Weekend is just how shocking of a twist it has. Like, yes, there was tension between the couple and they were probably starting to get on the rocks anyway, even if one of them was potentially about to die, but just a way that you can't possibly see the twist coming. Like, yes, there are hints about each of their past, but you're just not allowed to put the pieces together until it's far too late. And I really like that, because you get the same sense of hopelessness that Chaz does sat in that bathtub. But all the cute and not so cute coupley stuff before that I still really enjoyed, especially the Monopoly scene. I thought was so sweet. I really thought it was a great showcase of all of these characters in such a short space of time, especially after the round the corner chocolates made debacle. Like, it really showed how petty a relationship can get if you're together for long enough, and I just really appreciated it for that. It felt like a very raw look at romance until it was just a raw look at revenge. The whole scaphism scene was just so disturbing in the best way possible. Like, the complete lack of emotion from Joe really just hits home how, in a way, excited he's been to do all this. You know, it's perfectly shot, perfectly written, and it does just give you a sense of utter hopelessness for Chaz, even if he may or may not deserve it. Like, the whole nature of his death is just absolutely brutal, and while it leaves a lot to the imagination once the camera cuts, like, just the few images it gives you is enough to make you just horrified by everything. But not as horrified as I was scrolling through on Twitter afterwards, seeing some very straight white sounding women bitching about how this just had to be about a gay couple. And it's like, duh, this is Inside Number 9. You were not going to get any better relationship or two actors as comfortable in each other's presences as you would if this was not Steve and Reese performing it. Like, it made total sense to me.
The hotel is fabulous.
If you can't tell by now, I'm a general appreciator of the tone-setting openers for the series. Like, there's still 2 more to go after Zanzibar, but I still just want to make sure I give enough appreciation to this incredible episode. I love a good episode with a dialogue gimmick, and even though I'm not as familiar with iambic pentameter as I am with, like, rhyming, I still really appreciate how they had to get more creative with the script than usual, and it really pays off. Like, it gives the episode a nice sense of rhythm. And I love how all of the characters' different stories just perfectly weave together. Like, it's obviously not realistic, but it's obviously not meant to be realistic, and I really like it for that. You know, it doesn't take itself too seriously, and that helps you, in an odd way, believe that this is all happening, you know? Especially characters like the prince and the prostitute, which would be an amazing remake of something. Just work incredibly well. Like, their stories are so compelling, even though they're not exactly the most innocent people, you know. Just everything about this episode really works as a series opener, and while it's a shame that there aren't any other episodes that have this much of a gimmick with the dialogue, I still just appreciate this as a standout.
Would you like to die peacefully in your bed, or would you like to die horribly?
Going from one hotel episode to another, Lip Service is obviously a lot darker, but in an extremely gripping way, especially on a rewatch, seeing how this story unfolds and just knowing that Iris is purposefully doing all of these different things, constantly having to cover herself, it's just so gripping, and you can't help but feel sorry for Felix, who just ends up in denial about literally every single thing going on around him. You know, you shouldn't really feel sorry for him, considering he really shouldn't be in that hotel room in the first place, but oh well. But I think this gets the award for most shocked I was during my first watch of an episode. Like, as soon as Felix got shot, I was just mouth on the floor the rest of the episode, and considering how memorable everything before it was, and I was really trying to keep a retina on Iris, you know, seeing it all fall into place was just such an amazing shock that I truly did not possibly see coming. But at the same time, it makes total sense why Iris was acting so dodgy at every single possible opportunity. It just comes together to make one of the most interesting episodes to watch and rewatch, you know. Even though the romance scenes can be a bit awkward, once you know that they're designed to be awkward, they're a lot more rewatchable.
I love online dating.
Love is a Stranger is absolutely my pick for the most overhated episode, and this is going to be a bit rambly, but I have a very personal story about my first time watching this episode that I don't think many other people had, or if they did, they didn't take it into the episode in the same way that I did. So the morning after every episode, I enjoy just telling my father about it. Like, he doesn't really enjoy watching the show like I do, but he is always interested to see what's going on with those League of Gentlemen people. And once I told him about Dermot O'Leary, and he had a good laugh about that, I told him that the premise of this episode was that a woman was going online looking for love, but there was a murderer about, and who can she trust? And he immediately went, oh, she's going to be the murderer, isn't she? And I was like, oh my god, she's going to be the murderer, isn't she? And it all just clicked from there. So when I sat down to watch the episode the next week, my eyes were directly on Vicky and keeping an eye on what she was doing, and I felt so rewarded for that. Like, as soon as she offered Norman tea and then was immediately slagging him off to the next guy she was talking to, I just knew she was the killer. And so I felt so rewarded at the end of the episode when she didn't die. Like, what's the point of a murder mystery if you can't solve it? And you get so many perfect clues as to the fact that she's the killer that if you can't find the ending satisfying, then it's like, well, I can't say you watched the episode wrong because, like, you probably weren't going and guessing she was the killer, but it's like, for me at least, I felt like I'd cracked it and I was so proud of myself. And I think that's very clever writing by Stephen Rees to let you enjoy the episode in multiple different ways. You know, whether you think Vicky's the killer or if you think she's going to encounter the killer, it keeps you on your toes the whole time. And I did hear a lot of people disappointed that she turned out to be the killer, but I completely didn't see it that way, because like I said, if you figure out she's the killer, then you've solved the episode. You've successfully done the murder mystery. Like, I think that's a good thing at least. And even if you didn't appreciate the big twist, I think you get a good enough twist within every single call that Vicky has that you still can get a lot out of it. Like, whether it's her being completely blown off after a nice conversation, or Manny having a wife, and especially the one with Leslie was so brutal. As soon as you realised he was filling in a very corporate questionnaire, it just still throws you to every end of the emotional spectrum within every call, and that's what a good number 9 episode can do. So to just condense that down into 5 minutes, I just think it's perfect. So yeah, I think it's perfectly fair enough if you didn't get as much out of the episode as I did, but I don't know, it's just the perspective and first watch that I had of it. It just really elevates it in my mind to one of the absolute greats, and who knows, over time other people might be able to start appreciating it like that.
Thank you, Philomena.
Don't worry, Merrily Merrily isn't this high just because of Diane Morgan, even though she is the absolute highlight of this episode and pretty much any episode of anything that she's in. But the rest of the story and the characters are completely compelling in their own way. It's a very sweet and sentimental one, which is quite different for a series opener, but I think it works, and it still keeps the general comedy tone you get from a series opener with Diane Morgan. Like, as soon as she walked in talking about her stung fanny, I was just hooked. I was laughing. She's the best. We love her. And she was also the most relatable character to me, as I simply couldn't be arsed with university, and I like to hope I've turned out relatively well adjusted. You know, even though I put Bernie Clifton's dressing room near the bottom, I've still turned out alright. But that didn't mean I wasn't invested in all of the other characters. Like, seeing the fact that they've all met up after such a long time, that sort of hits hard for me in its own way, because I'm getting to that point where I'm far enough away from secondary school that I'm bumping into old classmates years after I've last seen them, and it's genuinely kind of jarring to see just how much life progress they've all made at this point. But luckily none of them have unravelled quite in the way as this bunch of characters, and all of their stories are quite emotional in the perfect way. Like Callum not really being able to start his own family or achieve a new life that he wanted after getting his dream job. It's sort of a stagnation that's very relatable to all sorts of people, and it feels very down to earth, especially for Inside Number 9. I think that story was handled incredibly. And Darren and Lawrence were amazing as well. Like, even though I did sort of think something was up when he said about how basic his book that he was making is, it still hit so hard to find out about his dyslexia, and it just gave a wrinkle to his character that I really enjoyed. And Lawrence is obviously the star of the show here, losing his wife in such a tragic way and seeing how this is his final coping mechanism about it all. It was just so engaging. I love everything about this story, except slightly the ending, just because as soon as the fisherman said that all of the others were on the other side, I was like, oh yeah, Lawrence is dead. Yeah, Lawrence is dead. Yeah, we get okay, and it just went on for like 2 minutes of that, trying to be ambiguous when it really didn't need that. I appreciate the ending as its concept, and him getting to see his wife again was nice. Just, I don't know, I think that's the only thing keeping it from getting up even higher. Like, just some tweaking to the ending might have been nice, but it worked on its own. It just, again, it felt a bit too drawn out for what it was.
Oh, stop going on about that!
I really don't have anything else to contribute to the 12 Days of Christine discourse. It's a perfect emotional episode. It's one of those ones that I can rewatch over and over and over again, which I can't even say about the ones above this. Just everything about it was so perfectly crafted. You fall in love with Christine in such a short space of time. You just want to see her flourish, and it's so sad when things just end up not going her way, you know? Especially the big twist, which was pretty much the one that put the show on the map as a true classic show. Just everything about this is pitch perfect, you know, I can't say anything else about it. No point going through it all. My favourite month was probably February, just because I think Fung is really underrated in the episode. Just everything about it, perfect. Just, again, not the funniest, sadly.
It's twice remodeled.
Removed, Jerry.
I don't want to be too harsh on an episode I've ranked this highly, but I do fear that a lot of people will have forgotten about this episode until I've mentioned it right now. Like, there's something about it that feels so under-discussed, and not even like a underrated sort of way. It just feels like no one mentions this episode, like, ever, which is such a shame, because I just think it's one of the best concepts for an episode ever. Like, I love a good let's see how this mess formed type episode, like your Hangover types, even though this is extremely different from the Hangover. Just everything about this episode is so interesting. Seeing how everyone got to the place they did 10 minutes prior is just amazing. I think my favourite part of this ensemble cast is definitely May. Like, she is such a compelling character, and you feel just sorry for everything that she's going through, especially when you find out that her husband's cheating with Natasha. That's when the episode gets so brutal, because as per its design, once you see this, every single other 10-minute segment makes so much more sense. And when the final twist is that this is the first non-number 9 we've technically been in, everything about this episode just felt so tightly crafted in a perfect way, and I really hope it can get more and more love as time goes on. Even though it's not really got the most to talk about at the end of the day, I do feel like that was pointed out to me before, but I don't know, I still just hope that as time goes on I can just see more and more discussion of this one. From the moment that Catherine Parkinson walked into frame, I knew Plodding On was going to be the perfect final number 9. Like, I was very publicly hoping that this episode would be about, like, the writing process of the show, and oh no, what are we going to do for the last ever episode, and the fourth wall breaks down and Stephen Reese just have a load of meta fun. But I'm so glad that we got what we got. Like, yes, it breaks every single rule of number 9, like all the actors coming back, everything like that, but it just worked so perfectly. I loved all the little vignettes to represent specific previous episodes and how literally every singular prior episode gets referenced in some way, shape or form during the episode. It just feels like a giant love letter to the entire show, and that's what you really need out of a final episode, and it accomplished it perfectly. And I love how, in spite of all of the classic stuff coming back, there is still a brand new story between Steve and Reese, and you can tell how representative it is of their fears to move on from the show, but how a clean break will just be good for them. I think my favourite scene in the episode was the one with Emily Howlett. Like, after hearing all of the stories about how well she was treated on the set of Empty Orchestra, to see her come back and have a lot of fanfare put behind her was just so sweet, and I really hope she does get another role in whatever Steve and Reese do next. But of course, the ending was one of the best scenes in the entire show. Just a perfect meta little bye-bye to everything, and just the fact that they referenced the bus episode, like they can tell how much everyone really wanted it, is so amusing to me. Like, I didn't really think it was any great loss. Like, they clearly hadn't thought that much about what they would do for a bus episode, but to see it get referenced and pretty much have every single piece of piss possible taken out of it, I just thought was so brilliant. So yeah, this is just an amazing end to the show, and as you can tell, one of my absolute favourites.
Stop! You won't get away with this!
Wuthering Heist is the funniest episode in the show to me. Like, again, it's very meta, and I still appreciate that kind of humour, especially when it's done as well as it is here. I just think everything about it is so comedic in the best way possible. Like, even when it takes a dark tone and everyone starts getting killed off, it's still a really fun ride. Like, this episode just has everything that I could possibly want. It has a good cast, it has a really good Stephen Reese performance, it has a really compelling plot told in an extremely unique way. Just everything about this is exactly what I want out of a number 9, and it also helps that this was the first ever episode that I actually watched live. Like, I started hearing about the show late 2020, so by early 2021 I was ready to blossom into a live viewer, and this was just a perfect way to start, you know. Just everything about it worked. I always love the BBC getting mentioned in a BBC show, even though I wish that the BBC could stop being referenced as anything apart from the place where you can watch Inside Number 9 and Casualty. Just, yeah, I think this is subjectively my favourite episode. It's just not objectively the best episode to me. It doesn't have the same emotional beats as my favourite, and I don't have any possible critiques for this. It is pretty much an 11 out of 10. It's just, yeah, it's just one other episode I find tops it. I am still in awe that A Random Act of Kindness is not considered one of the all-time great episodes. It has a perfect script, perfect cast, everything and everyone in it is likeable, apart from the villain obviously, but that's its own sort of separate thing. Just everything about this works, you know. I do intensely relate to the domestic aspects of it, and like, especially in the past year, it's become surprisingly increasingly relatable, but never mind that, you don't need to learn all about me, especially this late into the video. I think this also deserves praise for seamlessly tying together several different genres in one 30-minute stretch without having it feel laboured in any way. Like, the sci-fi elements do not get enough credit. Like, I don't see it as just a time travel story. Like, you really have to slightly think about what the implication of all of this is. Like, in this new timeline where Zach has to go back, and since the bird doesn't hit the window and Bob doesn't appear, he goes off and is doing all the time travel stuff with his life, but then he goes back and does the oncology research, but because of that he gets killed by his partner and then goes back and does stuff. It's an endless loop of these two timelines, and I think that's like metaphoric for something that I can't really put my finger on, but I never see that get discussed about this episode, the way that this timeline is still a closed loop. Like, no matter what, no matter how he does it, he will end up losing touch with his mother, getting back in touch with her. I think it still symbolizes, you know, a mother-son relationship in a really perfect way. I don't know if that was fully what they were going for with the implications of all the time travel stuff, but I thought it was utterly perfect the way it was done. And I was so excited to see Jessica Hine. She's one of my favourite actresses, and I'm so glad she got into this episode. She plays the awkward single mother so perfectly, especially when she wants her little tappy keyboard on the iPad. Oh my god, that was the most relatable thing I have seen in my entire life, that whole dispute. It's just, it's probably the fact that it connects to me so well, but just everything about this episode is pitch perfect for me. Like, I could go on for hours about every single scene, every single frame, and how much I appreciate it, but just know for now, just go rewatch it if you haven't watched it in a while, and just think about it in the way that I just described. Like, obviously you can rewatch it and see how Bob interacts with everything, but just look at it through the perspective of this is one of two repeating timelines, that no matter what, it will come back to this again. I think that adds such a perfect layer to this, and yeah, please don't ask about my domestic life. I really don't have time to go into it. So yeah, that's everything ranked. I'm sorry if I didn't come across as the most proper, official, televisual, criticky type throughout this. Like, my biggest source on how to review TV is still Harry Hill, so I had fun with this, and that's the main thing, even if I did struggle with my adjectives a lot of times and probably drove several people crazy with my use of words, you know. I enjoyed myself, and I enjoyed watching this show, you know, especially now we have the full 55 episode package. It's great to just look back on what we've had and just the sort of impact that it's left, you know. I think now that every single possible type of episode has been done, it's just really nice to look back at how it's all been executed, and there are so many people still talking about this show, giving it more analysis and time than I ever possibly could. And special shout out to Wheelin. I still love watching all your reviews. I can't wait for your series 1 episode 3 review at time of writing. I'm sorry that I didn't directly send this to you. I was too nervous to. I didn't want to disturb you, but you're still just such an inspiration for this, and your channel's just amazing. Gonna do all the linky stuff, even though you've still got like 14 times more subscribers than me. It's a nice gesture, you know. Thanks for watching if you did, my love. But yeah, if you have any questions or concerns, do let me know. Just a common question between Number 9 fans is, what would you do if you were asked to make an episode? And I think my concept would be a Big Brother winner getting home and immediately looking up compilations of his best bits on YouTube. You know, they can find a 9-minute video, that can be your 9. And I think there's a lot of potential from that, especially now we know what sort of hell reality stars go through. You know, it's a lot of commentary that Stephen Reese will probably have some grasp of, maybe. But bye-bye. Have a nice day.